Okay. Hey everyone. First of all, I thank you all for taking the time and joining us for this session today. And a special thanks to the Women Tech Conference team for having me. First of all, I hope you and your families are all staying safe and healthy and are all vaccinated. Like many of you, I too cannot wait to just get out and start traveling. Okay, some housekeeping items before we get started. This session is around 20 minutes. I will cover the presentation material in about 15 minutes, so there's at least 5 minutes for question and answers. So as questions come along, do feel free to type them into the chat window here. By way of introduction, I am Priya Mouli. I'm based out of New York, and I'm a director in KPMG's Technology Risk Consulting practice. I cover the areas of cybersecurity, privacy, data protection, and regulatory compliance. Most of my experience has been with supporting financial services and technology companies with their cybersecurity strategy. So I've worked with the three lines of defense on building and really operationalizing their tech risk programs. My recent focus has been leading engagements around continuous controls monitoring, streamlining processes between risk and compliance management, and really working with senior management and the board to really think through that middle ground between security risk and agility in the race to adopt disruption. What I do for fun. I love watching movies in theaters. So with COVID around, I binge watch Netflix and particularly tune into Grey's Anatomy. And I spend my free time writing poems, learning new languages, and learning about wildlife, particularly predators. Okay, so let's move on to our discussion for today. Um, let me move into the agenda slide. So before we jump into the world of risk metrics, I wanted to start off with an introduction of what is technology risk management. And after that, we will move on to risk appetite to set the foundations, and then move on to the what, why, and the building of risk metrics. And ultimately, we will move into risk reporting. What is technology risk management? I know the slide has a lot, but then simply put, it deals with any risk that touches data or technology assets in an organization. Technology risk management is meant to be an umbrella framework to help with managing risk across multiple disciplines, such as identity and access management, application security, third-party security, enterprise resilience, and so on. So why are we talking about tech risk, and why now? We are industrial revolution today, and based on a recent survey, we're still seeing that for the most part, technology risk is still seen as a sledgehammer, so to speak, or as an internal firm regulator, as a result of which they are engaged only after an issue surfaces or a breach occurs. Also, less than 50% of organizations account for cloud connected devices and mobile device and application management in their risk assessments. Now, this is a shockingly low number given the huge uptick in digital transformation, especially in a post-COVID world. But it is important, especially now, to not let cyber risk take the backseat. Also, hackers are just waiting for the right moment to strike, and we've already seen ransomware attacks to this effect. The most recent ones being Colonial Pipeline and JBS, where hackers are really looking beyond the data into targeting the physical assets. And here we see cases in point around targeting the critical infrastructure and supply chain. So it only makes sense to start thinking of proactive risk management, and risk measures or metrics is a way to achieve just that. With that said, let's enter the world of risk metrics. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, let's set the foundations right with looking at risk appetite. So risk appetite is the amount and type of risk that an organization is willing to pursue or can retain or can take. And what I've seen across my clients is that risk appetite is generally a set of overarching qualitative statements that depend on the company's business context. For example, keeping the customer transaction availability is important for a retail bank with an omni-channel presence. The OCC heightened standards has some guidance around how to set risk appetite within the organization and who within the organization is responsible for setting this and ensuring that it stays current. Um, OCC, by the way, stands for Office of the Comptroller of Currency. Um, Essentially, what this is that it's an independent bureau within the United States Department of Treasury that serves to regulate and supervise all national banks and licensed agencies of foreign banks to ensure the safety and soundness of the US banking system. So you might be wondering, why are we talking about risk appetite as it concerns metrics? Well, we generally want risk metric thresholds to be in line with their risk appetite. And this brings me to why we even need metrics. So risk metrics, as you see on the slide, are measures, numbers, percentages, or trends that serve as a measure of the risk that an organization faces, and this can be tailored at varying levels of granularity. Risk metrics with thresholds and corresponding trigger actions defined can enable companies stay ahead of the curve by allowing them to get visibility into risks before they occur, and hence enables proactive risk management. Now, it is important to understand that it is these trigger actions when certain thresholds are reached that can be automated and not the metrics themselves. Now, let's move on to the KRI build process, the how of risk metrics. Now, this slide lays out 4 basic steps, but note that this is a cycle, right? As KRIs need to be refreshed periodically. Let's talk some ground rules for developing them. First off, data should be available to support the metric, and key stakeholders, such as your risk control and process owners, should have high confidence in this data. It would also be helpful to have a risk and controls taxonomy, namely a domain hierarchy or structuring or framework. And what this means is that the intent is to really standardize the risk and controls language to enable a common understanding of risk across business functions. Another thing to keep in mind is that metrics work best when they are aligned to a key risk and serve as an effective measure of that risk. For example, absolute numbers in the case of audit or regulatory findings work better, and relative trends such as percentage increase or percentage over a period work better when you're measuring, say, the percentage of emergency changes or the change failures. So KRIs could also serve as, strategic or aspirational measures, meaning what an organization may want to focus on in the near future. For example, metrics on insider threat. You can also have metrics around, that could be special purpose or trigger based in cases of a merger or acquisition or divestiture, right? The reason I bring this up is that with COVID, we see a lot of consolidation across industries. Another point I want to mention is that metrics could also serve as maturity indicators of your program. For example, if your organization has a higher number of automated versus manual controls, you know that you're at the higher end of the maturity curve. And last but not the least, right? But the most important in my view is to have an up-to-date data dictionary capturing the entire data, such as the KRI formulae, thresholds, the data elements that constitute the formulae, where they are sourced, their update frequency, owners, which reports they land on, etc. Now, let's go through some examples of KRIs to make it real. One metric that comes to mind is, the percentage of incidents impacting systems housing, meaning personally identifiable information. Another metric could be the number of privileged systems you might want to monitor. And you can see if this is trending up or down. You might also want to use composite or complex metrics. For example, in the same privileged accounts case, you might want to break it down by employees, meaning full-time and part-time, versus third parties, including your vendors, contractors, business partners, and also slice it down by their concentration by geography and have the split by the critical application systems and platforms they have access to. Another timely KRI that comes to mind is the percentage of unplanned or emergency changes and the percentage increase in the procurement of collaboration tools, such as a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams, with certain contractual clauses relaxed. Now, I brought these specific examples, recognizing that some firms may be relaxing their thresholds given the current situation. What I'd like to highlight is that and to resume to original thresholds once things get better, we should be okay. And like I said, the KRI development process laid out is a cycle, and there needs to be an associated governance governance process for any changes to the metrics, say proposing new ones, changing formulae and related data, including retiral of these metrics. Now that we've covered the how, let's discuss some of the common challenges in using metrics and how to make them more effective. This slide is pretty self-explanatory, but three things I'd like to emphasize are this one here. KRIs need to be viewed together to give you the visibility into your true risk exposure. For example, you might have a metric around the percentage of assets that are end of life or coming due end of life. Another metric you might have might be around the percentage of assets that you really have insight into. For example, if you have a number of gaps in your asset inventory reconciliation process, you know you have a problem. The second most important point is poor data quality. Now, there is a reason as to why I've blown this up on the slide. I can't emphasize enough on this, as this is what most companies struggle with. Not necessarily because they have bad data to start with, but issues start arising when this data is not refreshed regularly, when it's not updated by the right owners, when there is no system of record, or having a disconnected ecosystem, meaning tools not talking to each other. So let's land into the world of risk reporting, right? Because now we've spoken about risk metrics. Let's talk about how the next steps of how KRIs, their trends and related data will be used to really drive risk decisioning. Now, risk reporting is generally considered to it's generally considered to be an upper management item, but it is important that reporting happens timely across all organizational levels, right from the day-to-day operational teams to middle management, to leadership, and ultimately to the board. Now, there are quite some guiding principles on the slide, but 4 points I'd like to call out are relevant. Understanding audience is very important in terms of fine-tuning the content and the level of detail and determining the appropriate frequency of metrics, especially for, executive leadership and the board. The content should be made available succinctly across devices and platforms, with drill down abilities into the detail as and when they need it. The second point, which is point number 4 here, is advanced and aspirational. Now, risk reports should have a forward-looking agenda in terms of bringing attention to emerging risks based on industry trends and your internal environment. The third point is around numbers and words. So, well, what I mean to say here is that risk reports should have the right mix of qualitative data, meaning commentary from risk and control owners with respect to certain metric values, their trends, any action items planned, and quantitative data, meaning the actual metrics and their values themselves. Now, the critical element on the slide is around automation of the risk reporting process, soup to nuts. Right from pulling source data to translating them to risk metrics, gathering commentary from stakeholders, and pushing them into visualization tools or dashboards using technologies such as a Tableau, a ClickView, or a Power BI. And this works best for 2 reasons. A, it improves data confidence by reducing manual intervention in the data. And B, the number of man hours saved for every reporting cycle could be huge. And this is based on what I've seen at almost every organization I've worked with, and I'm certain you might have too. Now, the other aspect I would touch on is that some of the large banks I work with are seeing more regulatory scrutiny in involvement of their boards in providing credible challenge and weighing in on cyber risk related decisions. And what this means is that the reporting going to the boards, right, should be timely, clear, concise, absorbable, and needs to be more transparent from companies' management, even if it means delivering bad news without any fear of repercussions. Okay, so now we've covered the guiding reports. I'll talk about the inputs and outputs of risk reports. this slide has a lot to say, but a couple of things I'd like to highlight or call your attention to are make sure that when you have risk reports, you cover the entire tech risk universe, meaning across domains, right? Such as I mentioned, application security, third-party security, enterprise resilience, outside of focusing just on compliance issues. The second point I'll touch on is that it is really critical to perform a periodic analysis by taking all your risks, issues, control risks, failures, problems, however your organization calls them, to understand themes and trends, to really pinpoint those areas needing net new controls or control revamps. And this can potentially also show you areas where you can tune down your existing controls, resulting in cost savings. With that said, we will move on to the next slide. This basically has some CEO survey results on stats with respect to what companies are seeing with respect to some of the common challenges they're facing in seeing the true risk reporting. Now, let's talk about some of the ways to overcome this. A is around having a uniform or standardized risk and controls language and taxonomy, as I mentioned earlier. And B is having a golden source, meaning having a system of record like a GRC, meaning a governance, risk, and compliance tool to store all risk and control related data. And it might not be your single repository, but it's also important to kind of make sure that this system of record that you're using for your risk reports is connected to your other tools, like say your Jira issue tracker and your ServiceNow technology tickets that you're housing. Okay, so with that said, I want to part off with some concluding thoughts before we move it on to questions. Now, we may sometimes over-engineer and sometimes reinvent the wheel, but on risk management. But if you take a step back, it might actually not be that complex to start with. It's important to start with the basics, no doubt. And once you have the foundations right, like having a uniform taxonomy, enabling a common understanding of risk across business functions in an organization, we can potentially embrace and unleash new technologies at scale. And we've already seen a huge uptick in digital transformation in a COVID world. All right, well, thank you so much for your time. That's all I had.